Hey, welcome back. We're going to try to finish this up in one take here. We're going to be going through and doing our weather app. Now, if you remember, I'm going to open this up for you over here. We were sharing my screen. We were over here. And remember, we're using some helper functions. We've got a helper function for Celsius to Fahrenheit. We need a place to render the HTML or overwrite the HTML, all right, which we didn't get to yet. But we did manage to go through the background array and make sure that we have all the backgrounds that we need, which is good. All right, and now we're going to get started on this chunk here at the bottom. And what this is going to do is show us kind of logically how we're going to work through everything. And then because I don't want to keep nesting functions inside of functions, remember, we ended up pulling out this render function. But really, this just gets called down here. But what happens is you get kind of, you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into the function inside of a function inside of a function. You know what I mean? It's like you just start swimming down in there, and pretty soon you feel like you're going to drown. So what we're going to do is we're going to break some of this stuff out. Plus, it just makes it easier to read and follow, especially when you come back to it. Even if you're going to come back and comment everything out or do something visually like this to help you remember what's going on. It makes your life a lot easier. Or at least it does for me. All right, so this is where we're going to get started. So we have a helper function here. All right, we have our background image array, and we have a variable for a Boolean variable for Celsius. And we have something called API data, which I told you we're going to be using a little bit later on, just to store some data from an API so we don't have to go ahead and make that call again. Alrighty. We probably could just use that data directly right now, but if we're using, say, multiple APIs to get information, then we could just store it there. So it's not entirely necessary, but it just kind of helps me think about the problem. That's why I have it there. It might just be an extra step. So let's get right onto the main part of this. Now, previously, when we did projects here, we had a GET request, right? So we're talking about get JSON versus or JSON versus your standard request that we did with the quote machine. If you remember, we did it kind of longhand, and then there was a success, and it was a long chunk of code. But jQuery here, when we do jQuery, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can go back and take a look at that. But anyway, let's go into jQuery real quick and make a request here. We can actually just type in get JSON, all right? And that knows that we're going to go out and get JSON data, all right? It's shorthand. And all we have to do is feed it in to, all right, the where the JSON data was going to be located. And now, if you remember our structure here, we need to get the location. We need to figure out where we are first. So I'm going to go to my API that I showed you last time. All right. This is this freeGeoIP.net. That's all this is. I'm going to copy. All right. And once I have that, I'm going to paste that right in here. Now, there's one more thing here. If you remember, it has this format because it'll give you a CSV, XML, JSON, or JSONP. All right. If no IP or host name is provided, then your own IP is looked up. All right. So it just means it's going to look up where you are. You don't have to worry about the IP or host name because it's going to look it up for you. So all we have to do is feed it a / format. And I tested this before, and so I know that JSON works. So there we go. So there is one of the very simplest API calls that you can make. I think I have to put an extra / there because it's going to tack on something at the end. We should actually try it both ways. Anyway, and then after you make that call, you're going to get data, right? So once it's done, all right, we need to do something or run a function. And we're going to run a function. So once it's done here, all right, we're going to have a function. And that function we're going to use, and we're going to take one argument in here. We're just going to call this location. All right. And so this is what we're going to be looking for. So this is our location here. And then we're going to, and so remember the scope where we are here. I'm actually going to, well, that'll be good enough for right now. You can kind of see how it's indenting on us, but that's fine. Let's scoot this stuff over. All right, so what do we have to do right here? All right, what we need to do is, what am I forgetting? Now I'm taking a look at this down here because we have syntax. Always try to remember your syntax. If your syntax is not correct, you get messed up. There we go. All right, that's what I was looking for. I actually had the bracket for this function here ending this done function, but the done doesn't happen until you actually run a function. That's why you have to have this parentheses here. So again, just try to keep track of that. So typos, that's not good. All right, so all I have to do is I'm actually going to back up so I can see this. I'm going to reset all this stuff here. Delete a whole bunch of this here, just for spacing. Anyway, so what I want to do is I want to overwrite some things. All right, but what are we actually getting from this API? So let's see if we can get something back from this and see what this location here is giving us. So let me just do something really simple and console.log location. All right, let's see if we can't get us back some location. Save. We're going to settings here while we're here, and I'm going to turn off auto updating. I'm going to save and close. Now I have this run option. So I'm going to go ahead, save, run, console log. Oh, there is my, let me clear. I'm going to clear this out so you can see. Run. When I run this guy, oh, there we go. And you see how that took a second to come back from that API. So that's sort of the lag you're going to have in your network. So you can see there's a city. You know, it ran twice just slow. Here's your key value pairs: city, country, code, US, country name, IP, all that kind of stuff. Probably should block that out, but I'm behind my work anyway. Longitude, latitude, all that kind of stuff that we need. Good to go. Clear that out. Anyway, so here we go. So this works. Success. Success. All right, good. That's going to let me know later on to come back, and I could always get rid of these comments and see what this stuff looks like in the console log. You can also do an alert, and it'll pop up so you don't have to open the console log. Either way works. We know that we have location now. We can work with location. So location gives us an object data back. Now, where do we want to put this? Some of this information here. Now, remember, I want to overwrite. I have country name, and then I have a tag here to overwrite. Remember, so I need a country name, a city, a latitude, and a longitude. All right, those are the things that I want to overwrite, and I can overwrite that directly with this data, which makes it pretty easy. So I can say, go jQuery go. That's what that little $ means. All right, and what I want to do is I want to find where I have this here. So here we go. I have country name, ID, country. All right, and then I have city. Then I have a span with city. Then I have latitude and a span with latitude. And then a longitude and then a span, ID, longitude. So I can use these names of these spans. And these spans right now are just a space. So we have country name, space, and then we have a span here that is country. Then we have city, within a space, and then a span here that has a name. Since that span is blank right now, we're not really going to get anything there. I mean, if you want to see how this works and you want it to be more consistent with these dots up here, you could, let's see, where's the country? I could do something like that, and you'll kind of see there's the country name and just says ... I don't think that's really necessary, but just to show you that this overwrites. All right, so here we're going to do the country first. So I'm going to take this, and what I want to do is I'm going to use this pound symbol or a hashtag, whatever you want to call it. And that's going to tell to target an ID. Tell it, by it I mean jQuery. Tell jQuery to target an ID. The ID that I want to target first, I called country. Country, right? And so after I target that country, all right, I want to do something with the HTML code, which means I actually want to overwrite that HTML code. And what do I want to overwrite that with? All right, I want to take this location variable or object we're getting from this that I showed you, and I want to overwrite it with the value, okay, that has the key of country name. And remember, we had country name. All right, so location, okay, was that object, and then I say find the key country name and give me that value. So if we were successful, we run. Oh, look, it says United States, and those dots are overwritten. So you can put those dots in if you want. You don't have to if you don't want to. I'm actually going to take out those dots because I think it's pretty self-explanatory with just the colons there. But you can put dots in. You can put waiting for API. You can put please hold or something, whatever you want. So you can see how this works. Awesome. So we also want to overwrite with this data the state, which is the region, the city, and the longitude and the latitude. So I have city here. All right, so let's see, city, region is the state. All right, did I have city? No, I just have city, longitude, latitude. All right, so we didn't add a region in there. That's fine. So let's go in here, city, latitude, longitude. So that's all we need. And again, you can use any of that information from that object right here that you want. So I'm just going to Control C, Control V. So I have a city, longitude, latitude. So here under city, we're going to target this as city. And the name for city is city.city. Cool, that's what I thought. City. And then we want latitude. Latitude. And then over here, location. And the again, these are just the keys that we want. Latitude. Then longitude. Oops. See how I capitalized that? I just caught that just now, just by glancing. I'm going to have everything lowercase, so make sure that your IDs match exactly. Wrong box. Capitalization matters. Longitude. Not tooted. Longitude. And dot longitude. Cool. So if I save, I run. Ta-da! Pretty cool, right? And it's that simple for the location. A simple API right there that we called out to, and we got the longitude, latitude, city, and then there we're good to go. Now, let's see here. We have this this right here. If when I click on it, you see ends this bracket right here. Okay, inside of this. We need to still be inside of this GET request, okay? Because we're going to be using this location data in our weather GET JSON request, okay? So we want to make sure that we have the correct scope, which is what this is. So we need to still be inside of this function when we do the next step, when we make the next API call. So that's going to be important. So I need to make sure then I have a lot of space. if I want, I can have this over here. And if you want to kind of do that. All right. So I'm still inside of this. I went to the first API. I got the location data, and I'm going to be using that location data inside of the next API. All right. So how do I make this next API call? All right, this one's going to be a little more complicated here. All right. So let's do this. All right, now remember the location.latitude and location.longitude. Since we're still inside of this function, we can actually use these, all right, for the longitude and latitude for our weather API, all right? So that's what we're going to do. So you can kind of see what this is going to give us, and you can see examples. And if you want to go back and take a look at this documentation, there's your API doc. And what we want to do is we want to make an API call by longitude and latitude. You can also make an API call by city, that kind of stuff. But I think the most accurate is going to be longitude, latitude. So I'm going to do that. But here's a call. So you can do it by city name, country code. You can do it just by the city name. All right. By geographic coordinates. So this is what we want. Look. This one right here. And we have this lat equals, right? And then we need to have this latitude and longitude. I'm going to copy that. That's what we're going to use. All right. So I need to do the same thing as get JSON. So go jQuery. Get J, capital JSON. And we need some place to go. This is where we need to go. All right, which is going to be all of this stuff. All right, let's see here. I am checking something here, right? So this opening, closing, we have this. All right. Now, this is going to be a little different. We're going to have to do either some escape quotes or something else. But right now, this up to this point here, all right, we need to put in a variable here and not a string. So I'm going to finish that quote there. All right. And then we know that after this point here, that and that. Okay, there we go. Whew. All right, so what I've done now is I've isolated these variables here, all right, this latitude and longitude. So what I have to do is I have to concatenate now these strings together. So I need to get rid of this, all right? So latitude, what is the latitude? Here is the location dot latitude, all right? So again, since I already know this works, I'm going to copy. And again, this location.latitude now is a proper variable. But don't forget we have to concatenate this by adding this into both sides. So all right, and then the longitude, Control C. Over here, ++, Control V. All right. And so actually there's only one plus there, right? Yeah. All right, so there's location plus latitude plus. All right, now there's something else that we need here. If we make this call without an API key, remember, it's not going to work. So don't forget that we need to add in that app data that we showed at the beginning of the last video. So there's longitude, latitude, and there is a little string we need at the end of this as well. trying to see where this data is. I showed you last time. Here we go. We have this thing here that we can add at the end. So we have this and units equals. All right. If we say metric, it's going to give us Celsius, but we want Fahrenheit. All right. And then we have to add this and units. All right. And I want imperial. All right. So let's do this. Let's go back in here. So we have to remember what is string and what's not. So this is all just going to be string, and I'm actually going to do the whole rest of this in a string because I didn't store my API key in a variable. If you stored your API key in a variable here, you could have just added and concatenated that variable as well. So I have everything we need, longitude, latitude. Okay. That works. You can also store this entire string if this is getting really messy and confusing to you. You can store this whole string in a variable above this request for the get.json, and then just use that variable as well and call it like API location or weather API if this is looking too confusing for you, or it's going to be hard for you to read back later. But I'm just going to go ahead and plunk it in here. So we also have to add in a string. That is an ampersand units equals, and we don't want metric, we want imperial because our starting units we want in Fahrenheit, and then worry about toggling that later. So it's imperial. So that means that the units are going to be imperial. Okay. And then we have to also feed this, and we have to feed this our app ID, which I've already have up here ready to go. And again, I did that last time. I registered for the API. I got my API key. So, and my app ID, application. Okay. There we go. Let's see. Let's see if I don't get my syntax correct. Alrighty. So I'm going to get that. All right. And what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to run a function off of this. All right. So while I have this data, I'm going to run a function here. So it's not just going to be done. I'm going to lose it. So I am going to take in another function. Okay, and then I'm going to get, this was the location information. I'm just going to call this the data information. All right. And then that's going to give me a function that I need. So then I can function data, open this up. There we go. That looks about right. So I'm making this call, and I'm still inside of this call, which is why I have a comma function here. All right. Just in case you're wondering that it's not .done. That's why. So here I am. I'm going to not leave any space because I'm going to be in here. Whew. That was a lot, right? So if you got through all this, you can let me know if you want me to explain what this is, but this is just concatenating a string with some variables. All right, and all I did was go back through our documentation and see what we needed all together to make this whole thing work. All right, so you have to go in, you have to feed it a weather. All right, then this question mark says there's data coming. The data is latitude. All right, and you give it a number. It's already in a variable in this case, in this data object. All right, and because the next piece of data is coming, longitude equals, feed it the longitude, concatenate with and the units are going to be imperial and the app ID or API key, and here's my API key. That's what that means. All right, just one more time. So hopefully you're clear on what I just did in concatenating a string, or hopefully you can concatenate a string in JavaScript, and that's not too difficult for you. What I want to do is I have this global API data to store information in, if you remember. I can work directly with the data if I want. I don't have to use this global API data. But like I said before, I might be wanting to use different APIs. And since I pulled data out for helper functions, or I might want to reuse some of this code later on, that's all. That's the only reason I'm doing this. API data equals data. All right, and that's going to be this data here. I'm storing it in this global variable so I can access it. I can even console log it. So we can even see if I'm inside of here, I can console log it up here and see what it is. So if the API is just not working or only worked once, I can kind of use that to troubleshoot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log API data and see if this works. Console. Hey, said I'm going to pull up. Hey, said I'll pull up my console. Clear my console. Save, run. And let's see what we got going on here. So our data, see what we're doing here. Let's console logging data. Uh-oh. All right, so this is working. All right, let me take a look at this a little later on. So what we're going to do, I'm going to come back to this and say, not logging data right now. Right? Which means I could have an error in here. It means that I might have reset this API key. Let's feed this a new API key. Gonna sign in. I'm already signed in. And again, you can say I can have multiple keys in here. And we'll try to see what's going on there. Let's see if this one works. This. All right. And what I did is I have another one that I have open just to check to make sure the API key works. I'm in the same location. All right, so let's go over here. And I'm going to do the same thing. Okay. And that should give me what I need. All right. All right, let's move on. I'm going to move on here because I'm going to come back to this in a second. So function mod. I'm just checking my syntax, making sure there's nothing obvious here that I can come back to in a little bit. Lat equals location, latitude, at one equals, and one equals. I'm just, again, like I said, I'm just lat equals, at one equals. Units, imperial, and FID. IMPERIAL. Oh. All right, I'll come back to this in a minute if this doesn't work. What I want to do is I now want to, because I'm using the helper function up here for render, I'm going to use this render function to place data into these areas here. All right, and that's why I'm also using this global variable to help us out. But I'm not really concerned about that right now. So let's take a look at this, and I'm going to come up and troubleshoot this in a little bit, because I think what has happened is I have I need HTTP. There we go. That's what happens. So I knew there was something up with that. And again, as you're going through doing stuff in real time, you'll notice you make little mistakes like this. It's not a big deal. What you're mad at? What are you mad at now? Expected identifier. Let me console log API data, save, run. Oh, there we go. Now it works. Don't forget the HTTP. There we go. And here is my object. All right. And you can kind of see I have base, all this kind of stuff. I have coordinates, longitude, latitude. Let me clear this out. And I will run one more time. There we go. So there's the object. And you can kind of see where everything is. There's actually identifiable information here. So I can actually come in and use this too. But there's visibility, clouds, wind, country, humidity. Pretty cool, right? And this is all things that now we can access. All right. So what things do we need in our object here that we can kind of pull out? Well, there are, let's see, there's weather. So where's our weather? Here we go. So here's our weather key. All right. And in our weather key, they even told us it's an object. All right. So we have an array of one, just like I told you before. This is all the information that we're going to be using in our weather object. So we have a weather object. All right. And we can use the array number 0. And then we can go to description. We can go to icon. We can go to ID. All right. There's also main. And if you want to see what all this stuff boils down to here, go to our API doc. I know this is getting long, guys, so I'm going to cut this off. I was hoping to do this in one thing here. And you can kind of see what all this stuff is here. Weather, main, and it gives you a description of what all this stuff is. All right. Good. Our APIs. So I have 2 APIs. Both are working. Both are within the same scope. Now I can write my success. All right. And so you can see why console logging this stuff out in various points really helps. All right. While I'm in here, I want to render some of this data. And since I'm going to be using helper functions, I'm going to kind of separate this out. So all I'm going to do is say render. Render. All right, that's going to be the name of my function. It's not going to recognize the function yet because I don't have the function. But I want to render and taking 2 things into my render, which is going to be the API data and C, because C is either going to be true or false. And I'm going to be able to render my data in HTML, meaning because it depends on whether it's Celsius or Fahrenheit based on this toggle that I'm going to show you right now. Comment that out so the program doesn't get mad at me. All right, so what I want to do now is I'm going to come back to this render in a little bit. I'm going to take care of this button here. So I have this button for Celsius Fahrenheit that goes nowhere, which means I'm going to use it as a toggle. And I can target that button because I named that button something. And I named it, I ID'd it toggle because that makes sense. So let's go in here and let's grab that toggle. So let's jQuery and jQuery ID toggle. All right. And after we have the toggle, so what do we do with that? All right. I want to wait for a click. And when we get a click, all right, I want to run a function. Right, what function do I want to run? Okay. I'm going to give myself some space here. I'm in the toggle function here. So I want to run a function and say every time I click this, all right, every time I click that button, I just want to take this C and I want to toggle it from true to false. Since the Boolean variable, if C equals not C, that means it's going to be true, it was going to be false, false is going to be true. It's just going to switch from true to false, true to false, true to false, true to false. All right. And if you take a look at our display temp, if C is false, which is the default, it just prints out the and degrees F, right? It just gives us our F, all right, which is our degrees Fahrenheit, right? Which is what we want. And then if C is true, it gives us the degrees in Celsius. So it's just looking for an integer, all right? And that integer that we're going to be feeding in, all right, is going to be let's see. We will toggle that. All right. And we're going to figure out what that is. We're going to take care of that in our render function, okay? What that's going to be. So that's not a big deal. So we can handle that. And again, I'm going to break all this out in a little bit. So it's just going to toggle back and forth, and it's just going to make that positive and negative. And I'm going to take care of that in this render function. So let's see, render here. Again, I'm going to feed it the data or API data. It's the same. So you're going to see it works both ways here. Let's see. All right. So again, all I've done is I'm sticking with this here. Toggle, place data render, which is a helper function, and then I got to set this background array. All right, so let's just see here. We can set the background array last. We'll do the background array last. Let's come up here and take care of this render function. What does this render function have to do? Now, this is going to be a helper function. So what is this helper function going to do? We've now called it twice. We want it to place this data down based on this display temp, based on whether that button's clicked. So whether that button's clicked, yes or no, we're going to toggle this C and then rerun the function. So all we're doing is toggling this C and rerunning this function on the click. And as soon as we get the information from the API, we're going to render the API data. All right. And again, remember, this render function is going to be taking in a true or false value. So notice you have API data C, and if you want, I just use data to show you it's the same thing because they both equal each other. But if you wanted it to be the same thing, it will work with API data. Again, the same thing as well. So you can use a global variable or the local variable, which is the point of this, me showing you this, okay? So either way, it will work, which is what kind of cool. Alrighty, so let's go back up here. Let's just make this function render. So what's my function render going to look like? All right, so now I've called it twice. Once when the page loads, okay, and once again, okay, if this button is clicked. All right, so, and again, this render, just because, again, we're going to be feeding in two things, all right? It's going to be looking for some data, all right, and you can call this whatever you want. We're feeding it the data, this data that's coming in just for consistency purposes. is going to be this data. But since we already know that we're feeding in API data into this render function as the first parameter, the names don't really have to match. You can call it, A and B if you really wanted. But to keep this consistent, just so it makes it easy to read, easy to follow, we're going to take in some data, all right, which is going to be an object. All right, that data object is coming from our current weather, and it's going to be that current weather data object. And we're going to be taking in, all right, remember C is that Boolean variable, true or false. And we're using that C to call our display temp function, and we're going to be using that C as a toggle for that button. So we're running this once, all right, depending on this, depending on that true or false, and then we're running it again based on that toggle. So since we're running it twice, that's why we're breaking this out, remember. All right. So what is exactly do we have to do? Well, we need to put some stuff here that has an icon, that has the degrees, whether in Celsius or Fahrenheit, and we're going to need the weather information here as well. All right. So let's go and do this. And you can break this stuff out differently than I broke it out, because like the icon's probably not going to change. So you can leave that local. And the weather description is probably not going to change. So you can probably leave that down in the bottom here, and just directly inside of this function if you want. But again, that's up to you how you want to do it. This is just the way, as I was messing around with everything, I kind of figured it out. And both ways work. There's actually a ton of ways to make it work. But this is going to be the way that I got this done. So we need to declare a variable, all right, inside of our render function. And I'll just call this the current weather. And so where is that weather located? All right, now the data that we brought in was the data object from our Open Weather API. Okay, and again, we can access that with key value pairs, just like we did with this inside of this free geo IP data object when we first made that JSON call. All right, and since that data we just called data, right? So data identifies that object because it's what this is right here. You have data. All right, and we can go to, if we remember the console, I closed the console. In there, we had a key value pair, all right, and the first key that we found was weather, all right, and now weather was an array of 1. So I want to access that array of 1. I'm not sure why they made that an array of 1, unless there's an option for some of the paid information that gives you more stuff in this weather array, I suppose. So in this array, we have something, all right? And then in this array is an array of objects. So they probably populate that with more objects, all right? And that object here is a key value pair, okay? And the key value pair I want for the current weather is going to be the dot description. Dot description, all right? And if we take a look at description, description tells us what it is. So description key value pair, key value. So that's going to be like overcast clouds or something like that. All right. And if you remember, the reason I'm calling it current weather is in over here. Let's go back over here. Oh, look, I have current weather as an ID name. And I have current temp as an ID name. See how I'm keeping everything the same? Calling everything the same, so that way we don't get confused. So current weather, the variable, I'm going to be using to overwrite current weather, the ID tag in my HTML. All right. So keep it readable, especially if you wait a month or 2 or 3, like I did when I first did this, and I came back to look at my code. It makes it very easy to follow. Not to mention when you give it to somebody else to help you debug your code if something's wrong, it makes it very easy to follow. So I'm also want to overwrite the current temp. I didn't overwrite it yet, but I'm going to overwrite the current temp. So I think I called it current temp. Current temperature. And again, all you want to do is make sure that current temp, good, current temp. And the current temp is stored in the data. Oh, so it's in data, but it's not weather. It's data dot main. See this? It's in the in this here in data dot main, not data dot weather. Data dot weather was inside of an array, so data dot weather dot 0 to get inside this object. Then you called description. This is just going to be data dot main, and then we can call temp. All right, and now temp is going to be in, since we got it in imperial units, it'll be in Fahrenheit. Otherwise, it's going to come in as if we didn't specify imperial, it would have came in as Kelvin, and then we would have had to do multiple conversions, and that's just annoying. So I'm not doing multiple conversions. So it's where was it? Data dot main was that was there. So it's dot main dot done, right? Okay. Now this is where we need our helper function. This is going to be in Fahrenheit. All right. What we want to do, all right, is we want to check before we post this if C is true or false. All right. So how do we do that? So this is data. Check this out. This is my degrees F, right? So look at my display temp. It's looking for data in degrees F. So I can feed this information into this. So since I broke this out display temp, all right, so I can use it multiple times because I'm going to need to use it. I can just say, all right, I don't just want that basic information. I want to run this through this function to check if C is true or false, and then either push out that degrees F or degrees C. All right. So in order to do that, all I have to do is say, I don't really want this. I want this. Right. But I want to run this through display temp function. Now, display temp the function is also looking for a Boolean variable C. C. Okay. That makes sense. And again, this is just a Boolean variable, and this is going to be a an integer, or actually a number, not an integer, but a number, because we're rounding it to an integer anyway. And so this Boolean variable we're using, again, is C. And again, that's our same C we've been using all along, which is the Boolean variable true or false. And again, the names don't have to actually match in some of these places, but keeping them matching makes our life easier when we try to figure out what the heck is going on here. The last thing we really need is the weather icon, right? So I want the icon itself, all right? And the icon itself is going to give us, where are we at here? Icon. All right. The icon itself here gives us the code for that icon. All right. So weather dot 0. Oh, that icon. Here we go. It's called icon. It's right there. So weather inside here, 0. And then the key icon, and it's going to give us this code. We have to look this up again, and I showed you where to look this up last time, but I'm going to show you one more time because it gets a little wacky here. All right, so this is where you really have to understand the API and the API documentation, and find an API with good enough documentation to figure out where everything is located. All right, so this is going to be important. So I'm going to set a var. I'm just going to call it icon because I probably even, well, you know what? I didn't put a space for icon because we're actually going to prepend this. So icon is going to be equal to data, weather, 0, and icon. Cool. That's all we need. Yeah, all right. So that's our render function to start. Okay, so now we've gotten everything we need from the API data. And now we didn't make another API call to get this data. We just fed in the API data we got once. Remember, it takes time to get the location. And it's going to take time to get the weather. So we only want to do that one step once. We don't want to keep making API calls because it's going to take longer and longer and longer. All right. And so let's do this here. All I'm going to do now is after I have this, I'm going to come in here and use my query. And I'm going to tell it to go over to current temp the variable, but current temp the ID, which is in the HTML, which I showed you before, and I kept everything even here. So current temp, I'm going to overwrite this span. All right, so HTML. All right, overwrite that HTML, and what I want to overwrite it with? Well, guess what? Just this variable. This variable current temp. Current. All right, there we go. And I'm going to do the same thing here. Not with the current temp. I'm going to do it with the current weather. Current weather. Again, I'm going to overwrite that HTML, and I'm going to overwrite it with the variable that I called the same name. Again, keeping everything the same name just makes it simple. Unless it's really confusing to you having everything the same name, in which case it's going to be more confusing. Again, I'm still inside my render function. Still inside my render function. All right. I'm going to have an icon source. All right. So you need to be able to look up that icon. All right. And if you go to the documentation here, you need to figure out where these icons lay. All right. So where the heck are these icons? All right. So you can kind of see we do a request, main base icon, and this will give you the icon ID lookup. But let's see where this is at here. Format. And I'm trying to go back through here into the doc and figure out where your icon is. Let's see here. I didn't pull it up ahead of time. Sorry, everybody. I'll show you where it is. All right, I'll show you where it is. I have it written down already. It's in that documentation. So just to save time, it is in a /image/w folder / and then whatever that number is .png. All right. So for sake of time, I'm actually going to come into this. I already have it written down. And so instead of finding this again, it is here. I'm just going to copy this chunk. I actually had this up when I did it myself. I went through the API documentation and I found that link and then I copy and broke it up. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a variable and I'm just going to call it, what do I want to call it? I called it icon source, but I'll call it API icon, right? So create a variable called API icon. I'm going to set it equal to, remember we're going to need quotes, remember my HTTP. So you have the openweathermap.org, and then you have an image file, and then /w, and then it's going to give you a set of things like 09D, all that kind of stuff, and it's going to give you that whole list of where everything is. And since I closed that page, in between here, which wasn't very smart of me, I don't have that example, but I showed that to you last time. All right. And so what I want to do is I want to add in that number. Where is that number? That number is inside of this data object for icon. In this case, it would be 09D for light drizzle. And again, all of these match back up with everything that's going to go inside of our background array. I'm actually going to split this out. I'm going to have to cut this video short soon after I do this, and I'll come back and it'll make more sense when we do the background array. So I'm going to need to concatenate rather. I'm going to concatenate this icon variable. Oops. Plus .png because they're PNGs. Right. And then the last step here that I'm going to do is come down here and I'm going to take this same thing here. current temp. Now, I don't want to overwrite it. I already overwrit that HTML once, but I want to add something before it. Since I want to put something before it, I can also say I want to pre-end it. That means I want to put something before it. And what do I want to put before this? All right, you prepend this with the HTML. All right, so I'm going to put some HTML here, which is going to be a simple image. All right, so an image, right? And remember, image src is image source, right? Equal image source, image source. Hey, single quotes and they get really annoying. All right, so with image source, I'm going to prepend it with that string, image source plus. I want to feed it this whole thing right here. All right. Now, I could have just prepended this with all of this here, but then it starts getting really convoluted like I showed you down below. So if you remember down below, I said you could take all of this stuff here and put this in a variable to kind of make it easier to read. Well, that's what I've done up here now. All right. I've now taken all that stuff where I've concatenated the string in a very simple sense, and then I'm just going to access that variable, which is my API icon plus, I need a closing tag. All right, so just add that image source tag. All right, and done. All right, so there we have our render function. All right, so let's save, run. All right, success. So as of right now, look, and it switches to 5 degrees C. 42 Fahrenheit, 5 degrees C, 42 Fahrenheit, 5 degrees C, and our toggle works. And again, we can toggle more things. So if you wanted to toggle more things like that, you could. We can add in something else. It keeps dropping to the bottom, which is really annoying. We had a fix for that with the quotes that you can add in. So I'm going to add that in on the next video, and then I'm going to show you how to change the backgrounds. But I think because we have the changing icon, we meet the minimum requirements for the freeCodeCamp challenge. So at that point, it's done. If you want to see how to clean this up and make it look really nice and utilize our background array, there is just some nice little tricky piece of code that we have at the bottom. It's pretty short, but it's pretty genius. And unfortunately, I didn't come up with it. I borrowed it, and I can't find where I borrowed it from, or where I forked it from, or where I saw it from. However, it's actually pretty clever. So when we come back, I'm going to walk through the entire project one more time. I'm going to walk through this and our code and how everything's working to get one final overview, and we're going to finish off the background. All right. So hopefully this was helpful to everybody, and I will see you all next time.